Welcome back to Mr. Hassan's Maths channel. I'm now answering question number 7 from the October-November 2022 IGCSE Cambridge paper 4 variant 1 of the 0580 syllabus. This question is all about functions. I was actually asked to answer part D of this question or part F of this question. I'm going to go through the whole thing just to give a little summary of what functions is all about. So here we have these four functions that are defined for us. You have f of x equals 10 minus x, g of x equals 2 over x, where x can't be 0, otherwise it will be undefined. H of x is 2 to the power of x, and j of x is 5 minus 2x. So you have these four functions, f, g, h, and j, which have been defined as given. Now the first part of the question, A, part 1, says find g half. All that means is take the function g and put in place of x a half. So we can think of the function g of x as 2 over x, or you can say 2 divided by x. It might be easier to think of it that way when we are substituting a fraction into it. So that's the same as saying 2 divided by a half. As we know, that's 2 times, when you multiply by the reciprocal, when you're dividing, so you change the division into a multiplication sign, and you flip the fraction, so it's 2 times 2 over 1, which is 4. So there's the answer to part A. We know that g half is equal to 4. Then part 2 says find hg half. So basically what this means is take what we found of g a half and replace that into the function h. So whatever g a half is, whatever you get when you replace the x in the function g with a half, which we found is 4, they want you to put that into the function h. So basically what this is saying is find h4, because g half is equal to 4. So we take the function h and replace the x with a 4. So we have 2 to the power of 4, which is 16. 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. Okay, and then part B, it says find x when f of x equals 7. Now the common mistake that people make here is they confuse this with f7. It's not asking you to replace the x with 7. No, that's not what it's asking you to do. So you don't say 10 minus 7. It's telling you to take the function f of x and equate it to 7, and then find what x is, then solve the equation. So you just replace the f of x with 10 minus x. So you write 10 minus x equals 7, and then find the value of x for which this is true. So we can subtract 7 from both sides and add x to both sides, so x equals 3. 10 minus 3 is 7. Right, so x equals 3, that's the answer to part B. Okay, very simple so far. Then it says find x when g of x equals h3. Okay, so we got to find x when g of x equals h3. Now, so we take g of x, which is this function here, and we equate it to h3. So g of x is 2 over x, and h3 is when we take this function h and we replace the x with 3. So this is 2 to the power of 3. We can see that h3 is equal to 2 to the power of 3. Right, replace x with 3, that gives you 8. So we end up with 2 over x equals 8. So you have 2 over x equals 8. If you want to solve this equation, these x and this 8 will change places. You end up with 2 over 8 equals x. How does that work? You can say multiply both sides by x and then divide both sides by 8. Multiply both sides by x to get rid of the x in the denominator. That gives you 2x equals that gives you 2 equals 8x, and then divide both sides by 8. You have 2 over 8 equals x, which in its simplest form is 1 over 4. So there's the answer for part C. Now for part D, it says find, this means the inverse of function j. So function j is 5 minus 2x. So we know that j of x is 5 minus 2x. Okay, we got to find the inverse of this function. The inverse of a function basically undoes that function. And the simplest way to find the inverse of a function, what I do first is I replace the name of the function, I call it y. So I say let y equal j of x. Okay, so y is j of x. So I replace the j of x with y. And then what you do is, wherever you see y, you call it x. Wherever you see x, you call it y. And then I simply rearrange this equation to make y the subject. So if I start with x equals 5 minus 2y, and I want to make y the subject, I can add 2y to both sides and subtract x from both sides. All right, make the x term positive, and then divide both sides by 2. 5 minus x over 2. That is the inverse function, 5 minus x over 2. That will undo this function. right? That's called the inverse function. So that's answer to part D. Then it says, write f of x plus g of x plus 1 as a single fraction in its simplest form. So you have f of x, which is 10 minus x. So you have 10 minus x plus g of x, which is 2 over x plus 1 as a single fraction in its simplest form. Now, some people will say, oh, let's multiply everything by x to get rid of the fractions. But you can't do that because this is not an equation. It's not this equals something and you multiply both sides by x. You cannot do that. What you must do here is you must make the denominators the same. So I can make all these denominators into x. How would I do that? Well, I can, first of all, I can simplify this first. So I've got 10 plus 1 is 9. So I have 9. Oops, where's my pen gone? So I have 9. Okay, and I have minus x plus 2 over x. So I've simplified it first. Okay, sorry, 10 plus 1 is 11. Sorry, not 9. Okay, 10 plus 1 is 11. Okay, 10 plus 1 is 11. Minus x plus 2 of x, that's right. All right, now I can make the denominators the same. So I see that my denominator here is x. So I can make them all over x. So to make them into a common denominator of x, what I can do is I can say this is the same. If I make this over x, and I make this over x, and I make this over x. Now this is already 2 over x, that's fine. Here, this is like x over 1, this is like 11 over 1. The 1 becomes an x by multiplying it by x. So I multiply the top also by x. So this is 11x. And this 1 becomes an x by multiplying it by x. So I multiply this top by x, so I have x squared. So I end up with 11x minus x squared plus 2. They're all under one denominator. So that's now going to be a single fraction, 11x minus x squared plus 2. And there's the answer to this question. Just write it down there. And there we have it. Right, so we've made this all into one fraction. Okay, so that's how you do it. You don't multiply everything by x. Some people will multiply everything by x, and then they'll end up with 11x they'll end up with 11x minus x plus 2x. Okay, and that's not correct. Okay, minus x squared plus 2x or something like that. They'll end up with something like that. So yeah, they'll end up with 11x minus x squared plus 2x. And that's not correct because, you know, you can't just multiply something by a number if it's just an expression. You can't just multiply the whole thing by something. You have to make the denominators the same and express them so they're equivalent fractions. This and this are equivalent fractions. Okay, they're exactly the same. Right, if you multiplied all of this by x, you made it x times bigger than what it is. So you can't do that. Okay, so it's very important for you to understand that. All right, that's part E. And now for part F, which I think that was a question that was being asked. It says f of x all squared minus f of fx equals ax squared plus bx plus c. Find the values of a, b, and c. So basically they're saying take this and simplify it. And then they're saying that it's going to give us something in this form. We've got to write down what the coefficient of x squared and x and the constant are when we've done that. So we take this. So we got f of x and we got to square it. So f of x is all of this. So it's 10 minus x and all of that is squared. Then you got minus f of fx. Now I'll put this in a bracket to protect it from this minus sign. Now what is f of fx? That's when you take 10 minus x and put it into function f. Okay, so this is 10 minus x. So how do you do this? Well, you replace the x in this function with 10 minus f, 10 minus x. So f 10 minus x is 10 minus, so you're going to take this and put this in place of it. This takes the place of the x. So you have 10 minus and you have 10 minus x. All right, so what does that give us? That's 10 minus 10 plus x, it gives you x. Okay, in fact, that means that's a function of, that's basically, this is the inverse of itself. This function is the inverse of itself. If I find the inverse of this function, I'm going to get 10 minus x will be the same thing, because when you put this function inside itself and you get x, when you put function inside another function that gives you x, I mean, they cancel each other out, so the inverses. So, you know, we can confirm that. If I look at this is just a side point, but if I find the inverse of this function, replace the x with y and the y with x. When you make y the subject, you end up with exactly the same function. The inverse function is the same. That's why you just ended up with x in the end. All right. So if you put 10 minus x inside the function f, you get x, all right, as we see here. So this gives us 10 squared, which is 100, minus, to expand the square bracket, remember the pattern is you square the first term, you multiply these two together and then double it. So it's 10 minus 10x, doubled is minus 20x. And then you square the last term, that gives you plus x squared. You got minus x. So you end up with x squared. You're going to have minus 21x plus 100. All right, so we can see we have to compare it to ax squared plus bx plus c. So you can see a is 1. This is like 1x squared. And b is minus 21. And c is 100. So there's the answer to part F of this question. Okay. Pretty simple. Just follow the instructions here. Okay, now, question part G. It says find x when the inverse of hx equals 10. So we know that the function h of x equals 2 to the power of x. That's what we were told, right? Now, in this question, like most people will try to find the inverse of this function and then equate it to 10 and then solve for x. Now, the problem is we don't know how to find the inverse of this function without some knowledge, which is, later on, which we're going to learn later on. So some people actually learn that now and they apply it and they will get the marks for it, but there's no need for us to do that. We don't need to go learn a whole new topic, which you're going to be learning in A-level maths anyway. You don't need that for this. They don't require you to have an understanding of this for this topic. You can answer this question without that knowledge, and it's very simple. If you can't find the inverse of this function, it's very simple, okay? You just ask yourself a simple question. Say, what would I have done? First of all, I can write this as y equals h of x, okay? Now, if the question said, find x when h of x equals 10, then I would replace the y with 10. If the question was just that, so I would say 2 to the power of x, I'd write 2 to the power of x equals 10, and I would solve for x. But because it says inverse, find inverse h of x, I won't replace the y with the 10, I'll replace the x with the 10. So the inverse h of x equals 10. To solve it, you just put 2 to the power of 10. Okay, so, and that will give you your answer. 2 to the power of 10 will be your answer. So instead of putting the 10 in place of the y, you put it in place of the x instead. Okay, so you have y equals 2 to the power of x. Normally, if the inverse wasn't there, you'd put the 10 instead of the y. Because it's inverse, you do the opposite. You put the 10 instead of the x. You can think of it like the x and y have changed places. So you've got to find what 2 to the power of 10 is. So 2 to the power of 10. And that gives you 1024. That's the answer to 3SF. 1024. And there is the answer to part G. That answers question number 7 from this October 2022 paper from IGCSE Cambridge, paper 4.1. Other questions from this paper can be found in the playlist that will appear over here. Other questions from the topic of functions in the playlist over here. You can subscribe to my channel by clicking on this link. Thank you for watching and see you soon.